You connect to the firewall for configuration and monitoring through the management interface. By default, the firewall allows management connections using HTTPS and SSH, but you can modify a number of settings related to managing the firewall by going to Device, Setup, Interfaces, Management. In this example, the IP address of the management interface on this firewall is 192.168.1.254 with a net mask of 255.255.255.0. The firewall management interface requires a default gateway, which in this case is 192.168.1.1. Most of the time, a firewall will have a static IP address as the type for the management interface. But the firewall does have a DHCP client component which can request and receive an IP address from a DHCP server on the same broadcast network. This isn't a common setting since most of the time you will assign a static IP address to the firewall for management. The firewall does support IPv6 on the management interface, but in this example we don't have that assigned. But you can assign both an IPv4 and an IPv6 address if you need to. These checkboxes for administrative services allow you to enable or disable services that the firewall listens for on its management interface. By default, HTTPS and SSH are enabled. The firewall does support both HTTP and Telnet for management access, but those aren't secure communication methods, and you should avoid using them unless absolutely necessary in your environment. The Network Services section allows you to enable or disable services that the management interface will respond to. For example, ping is enabled by default, so if you ping the IP address of the management interface from a workstation, the interface will respond. As an example, I do get a response to a ping to that IP address from this workstation. Depending on the requirements of your environment, you can enable or disable other services to run on the firewall management interface. For example, if you use an SNMP monitoring tool like PRTG or SolarWinds to gather health and performance statistics from your network devices, you can enable SNMP on the firewall management interface to allow those types of queries. This section here for permitted IP addresses is essentially an ACL, or access control list, for the management interface. By default it's empty, but in this example we have an entry for 192.168.0.0/16. The firewall will only allow management connections from hosts that fall within this range.